I think within the Rimworld community there is a huge running joke that Rimworld is a war crime simulator. Yeah, sometimes we make people starve. Yes, sometimes we chop up bodies and eat them. Yes, sometimes we engage in a little bit of child slavery. But most of the time we kind of shrug our shoulders and think, well, it's not that bad, is it? Well, today's mod kind of humbles us as to our experience with Rimworld. Introducing the Geneva Checklist, a mod that when I checked it out, I was genuinely so surprised it hadn't already been done on Rimworld before, because it just is so Rimworld. It's the most Rimworld mod that Rimworld could ever Rimworld. So let's get into things and let's check out these Geneva Conventions. So let's get into things and start with the content of the Steam Workshop page. What is there and what do we see? So we start off with the thumbnail here. I really like the design of this and I like Randy with his nice little hat on. Then we have the bulk of the description. It tells us the compatibilities, the broad basis of how this mod works, which is really, really nice. Going further down, we have the full technical support page for this. Now this discussion page literally lists exactly how we can achieve all of our atrocities. Now, I wouldn't usually check the discussion pages for mods because I think that it's not necessarily relevant sometimes, and sometimes they're not actually anything to do with the mod. But here we have a full explanation of how we can access every single achievement within this mod, which I think is really, really important. And it's something that I'm going to be referencing back to several times throughout this video because I'm using it as a complete direction for how to achieve some of these Geneva Convention breaches. The only thing I will say, however, is I'd like to see the actual Geneva Conventions, some of them, in fact, mentioned on the Steam Workshop page. Just a little bit of a sort of quote from the source, maybe just a kind of link to say, hey, look, this is where I got all my information from. It's not that big of a deal, I get it, it's just Geneva Conventions. Just to Geneva Conventions, but I would maybe just like to see a reference for where everything is sourced from. That's just me. So how does this mod look like in game and how does everything work? Now this mod activates when you breach a Geneva Convention, which funnily enough is a lot more than what you think. So here I have a little scenario set up. I have 3 colonists here, I've given them some really nice bedrooms. I've then put our prison on top of a soily patch and I've given them just a sleeping spot for the prisoner. I also then have a farmer here and I have a colonist with a rifle that then does toxic buildup damage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot the farmer, imprison them, and we're going to see what breaches of the Geneva Convention that we have. So shooting them and downing them, we then have the Geneva Acts Convention of 1957, the first schedule, Chapter 1, Article 3, attacking civilians or neutral parties with 1 infraction, and we then have the Geneva Convention Act 1957, 5th Schedule, Part 3, Section 1, Article 35, use of weaponry that causes superfluous suffering. So just from the small act of accidentally shooting a friendly farmer and imprison them, we've immediately breached 2 Geneva Conventions. Now, that's really cool, right? It's really cool that we've just breached a Geneva Convention. We can see exactly what Geneva Convention we've breached. It's amazing. I get that and I love it. But I want you to just note very quickly that I actually should have breached several Geneva Conventions with this one act here. Not only is the colonists' bedrooms significantly better than the prison, which should have then triggered a different Geneva Convention, they're also not sleeping on a wooden floor or a floor of any type. They're sleeping on soil, which also should have triggered a Geneva Convention, and they are also naked, which should have also triggered another Geneva Convention. This is a theme that's going to be active throughout this video. Whilst we are tracking some Geneva Conventions and it's really cool and I weirdly love it, it's not the best at tracking some of these Geneva Conventions. So that's going to be it for the content section here, and there is a hell of a lot more that I haven't showed you here, but I think it's important to leave this sort of stuff as a mystery. It's very much portrayed in the Steam Workshop page that is for the players to find out exactly how they can breach a Geneva Convention, in what unique ways they can actually do it. And obviously the full technical support guide is available on the Steam Workshop page if you want more of a guidance as to how to break Geneva Conventions, which I'm still trying to get over the fact that I'm supporting breaking Geneva Conventions in Rimworld, which is crazy, honestly. As you can see, this is really cool. Like, it's really impressive that this has been implemented and it tracks everything, but there's quite a few things that you immediately could have noticed that need to be improved. The Steam Workshop page, I would like to see a little bit more of a reference to the actual Geneva Convention, maybe a couple of direct links to the source, just so we can kind of see where it's come from, where it is, and actually if it is following the Geneva Convention and what the bases are. And I think that the tracking itself, it needs to be improved. I don't know how we can do this. I don't know where I've gone wrong, if I've made a mistake or not, but obviously tracking all the individual Geneva Conventions, maybe there's a time frame between it or something, I don't know, but it hasn't tracked them efficiently, and I've not been able to show you as much as I wanted to in this small segment here. So for the content section, I really like this mod, like I love it, even with its issues that I've very obviously seen. I love this mod. The content is amazing here, and it's so Rimworld, which I love. So I'm going to be giving it a solid 9 out of 10 here. So next, let's move on and check out the quality of this mod. Now, there isn't really anything for us to look at per se. The only thing that I could figure out doing was fact-checking the Geneva Conventions, which in all my history of ever playing Rimworld, and yes, admittedly doing some war crimes, I never would have thought I'd be looking at the Geneva Conventions online. So what... Jesus Christ. So here I have 4 breaches of the Geneva Convention that I've done on individual occasions. We have the Geneva Conventions Act 1957 First Schedule, Chapter 1, Article 3, Attacking Civilians or Neutral Parties, Geneva Conventions Act 1957 Fifth Schedule, Part 3, Section 1, Article 35, Use of Weaponry that Causes Superfluous Suffering, Geneva Conventions Act 1957 Sixth Schedule, Part 3, Article 4, Enslaved a Prisoner of War. Then we have lastly Geneva Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, Protocol 2. Now, this mod literally just tells us that this is the part of the Geneva Convention. There's no links, there's no source anywhere, so we kind of have to just trust the mod creator as that's what he says. So what I wanted to do was actually look up these Geneva Conventions to prove that the mod creator has taken this from the Geneva Conventions. So the first one we're going to look at is the Geneva Conventions Act 1957 First Schedule, Chapter 1, Article 3. And very nicely, Google AI tells us that this is exactly what this is. And clicking one of the sources to figure this out for ourselves, it very nicely lists it within this text here, which is great. Glad to see that this is accurate. Next, we have the Geneva Conventions Act 1957 Fifth Schedule, Part 3, Section 1, Article 35. And this one was very easy to find, where it states it is prohibited to employ weapons, projectiles, and material and methods of warfare of a nature to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. Next, the Geneva Conventions Act 1957, Sixth Schedule, Part 3, Article 4. Once again, Google AI telling us what it is. Clicking on the sources, we do eventually find it under the textual amendments, which states that without prejudice or to the generality of foregoing, the following acts against the persons referred to in paragraph 1 are and shall remain prohibited at any time, yada yada yada. Then we have slavery and the slave trade in all their forms. Then lastly, we have the Geneva Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, Protocol 2, and this is a whole new one that is fairly modern, actually, very interestingly. Partly the way down, it does state amended Protocol 2, mines, booby traps, and other devices, which does, I guess, include IEDs and spike traps and things like that. So as you can see, the mod creator has literally read the Geneva Conventions, picked things out that are the most relevant to Rimworld, and employed them within this mod. There is no inaccuracies that I can tell. Potentially there are some more things the mod creator could have actually included into the statement that's within the mod. I love this. I am a sucker for actual fact checking and things to actually make sense, and to make sense in game and in the real world. Like, this is amazing that the amount of quality and the detail has gone into this is on another level. Like, not only does this match the real world, it could like potentially be doing better, and it's taken specific segments of it. It's amazing. I love the way that I specifically know how I'm breaching the Geneva Conventions. Jesus Christ. So for the quality here, I have no doubts in my mind. 10 out of 10. The fact that this has literally been taken directly from the Geneva Conventions, word for word, and it makes sense within Rimworld is amazing. So next, let's move on, look at the balancing of this mod. Now, I spent a long time working out how is this balanced. All this does is track things, we can look at them, and it makes us smile. Like, how is this going to affect balancing at all, in fact? After spending a while talking within my Discord with some members, we kind of got to this point where we thought, well, this tracks individual events, individual items, and stacks. What happens if we have loads of these stacking throughout our games? Will this eventually affect performance? Is this something I'm going to have to worry about into the late game? Where am I at with this? So what I wanted to do was test whether or not a lot of these infractions in the Geneva Conventions, when they were tracked, did they actually make any difference to the gameplay? Whether we'd see a drop in TPS, in frames, or anything like that. So here I have a small scenario set up. I have 2 colonists, one of them with cataphract armor and a mace, and then I have a child. What we're going to be doing is using the 2 colonists here to hit 2 farmers. One is a male and one is a female, very important. They are then going to hit the colonists, turning the friendly faction into enemy factions, causing an infraction in the Geneva Conventions for hitting a friendly. We are then going to be putting them in prison in an extremely cold room, which will then cause another infraction because it's cold. Because we've also used a child to hit one of these friendlies, that will then cause another infraction because we're using a child military. and once we've put them in prison together with a man and a woman, which will then cause another infraction because it is not a single-sex prison, we're then going to strip them of all of their clothes, which will then theoretically cause another infraction. Once we've done that, we can look at the fact that there is a wooden end table within the prison. Because there is a wooden end table within the prison, it is therefore flammable, so it's not fire safe, which is another Geneva Convention infraction. And then because we have a royal bedroom compared to the prison being on sleeping spots, this will then theoretically cause another infraction because the prisoners will be kept in very poor conditions. Now we've got this, and we're going to be doing this theoretically 10 times over. Now I say theoretically because I practiced a lot of times and did this over and over again to try get the results that I wanted, because it would just happen that I'd end up accidentally killing the farmers, or my child would die, or something would happen which would skew the results in a way that I didn't seem was fair. So what I'm going to do is going to be using the Dubs Performance Analyzer to check the TPS and everything to see if there's any differences or anything, and we're going to kind of do things as best as I possibly can. So setting things up, I've roughly estimated there should be 70 infractions to the Geneva Conventions. I'm going to take away 15 infractions, but just in case there are some anomalies and things that go wrong, and because once we've hit a few of the friendlies, they'll immediately become hostile and then it won't count for some of them. So we're going to generously say 55 minimum infractions that should be caused here from the various infractions into the Geneva Convention. So speeding things up to make things fair, what I decided to do was only allow the child and the cataphract to hit the prisoners one time, and I would then go into dev mode to then down them so they didn't die and we get to maximize the amount. So a few of them did unfortunately die to the cataphract. Some of them actually did end up bleeding out as well, where we didn't get to tend them in time. I got the child and the cataphract to then imprison some of these people and got them to strip them as soon as humanly possible. I also used dev mode to heal some of the more serious injuries that would have actually killed the prisoners. So after imprisoning the colonists in a cold room that would cause them to have hypothermia in an unsafe temperature, stripping them of all of their clothes and forcing them to sleep on a sleeping spot, which would then cause them to be in unsafe conditions, having them have a wooden end table that would mean that it's going to be flammable, and then also beating them because they were once friendlies and then turning them enemies. I also then thought, for good measure, let's enslave them. Let's make them slaves, because that's also, funnily enough, an infraction on the Geneva Conventions. So that's what I did. I sped the game up really fast, got it to go 3 times mode, so we could try and enslave people as much as humanly possible. So after reloading the game and then causing the War Crimes tab to update, we only have a total of 36 total war crimes committed. I had previously already had 4 war crimes committed in this playthrough, so we only had the Geneva Conventions Act of 1957 First Schedule, Chapter 1, which was 4 infractions of attacking civilians or neutral parties. Okay, fair enough, I expected this. And then we only had another Geneva Conventions breach with the Geneva Conventions Act 1957 6th Schedule, Part 3, Article 4, which was 28 infractions of slavery. So funnily enough, this is nowhere near the amount of 55 that I very generously provided here, given the amount that we should have had. Looking at the TPS, it literally made no difference. Like, it made more of a difference having this many colonists and doing this many infractions. Unfortunately, with the amount of time I had to review this mod, there was literally no way that I was going to have like a 5-year playthrough just to see if it affected gameplay at all, because I mean, it's going to affect things anyway. So for balancing, it's not going to affect your game at all. Like, it's literally just there to look at and it's nice to see. And I mean, as you can see, it doesn't necessarily track all of the infractions, which is definitely an issue that is reoccurring for me. So I'm going to be giving balancing here a very solid, like, I mean, it's whatever. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Like, it's good. Yeah. So next, let's move on and look at the compatibility of this mod. Are there any bugs or leaks that you know about, and how this fit with your playthroughs? Looking at the Steam Workshop page and looking at the comment section for this mod, there are quite a few bugs that have been reported. A lot of people saying that things aren't tracking, a lot of people saying that things aren't updating properly, and there's a lot of things that are being caused to be Geneva Conventions that aren't really Geneva Conventions, which is kind of funny, but not really the point if they're not Geneva Conventions breaches. So just from the Steam Workshop page comment section here, you can kind of see where the rest of this section is going to go. There are issues, but they're not major. None of them are major issues. They're all very small and a little bit annoying. So one of the big bugs for me that I can completely overlook the lack of tracking for certain Geneva Conventions. The biggest issue for me was when the war crimes didn't actually register and didn't show up. Here I have a spike track that I'm going to be putting down, and this will breach the Geneva Conventions because it's theoretically an unmarked trap. I build it, and whilst it does register that I've committed one war crime, it doesn't actually show it. Now, I spent so long trying to work out how to fix this. I was going on the discussion page for this mod, looking up things, talking to people in my Discord community, looking at how we could fix it together. I eventually worked out that all I had to do was reload the game into the same save, and it then showed up with the Geneva Convention and the infraction that I had committed. So what I thought, I'd do it again and see if that fixed it. Just one reload would see if that would fix the mod. Once again, it didn't track the infraction. Like, it showed up, but it didn't come up on the infractions. I then had to reload the game again. I don't mind doing this, and I understand there's probably technical limitations here. If it's a case of this cannot be fixed, it needs to be mentioned on the Steam Workshop page, because this to me was a huge issue and really put me off trying to play with this mod. But that's just me personally. And then as we saw in the balancing section, I did have issues when it came to tracking the Geneva Conventions. It's a small thing, like it does eventually do it, and I'd imagine if I did one specific war crime at a time, like I was going down a checklist, it would have probably worked fine. But when I'm doing multiple infractions of the Geneva Conventions at once, I want to track all my infractions of the Geneva Conventions. I want everybody to know that I've done multiple different infractions of the Geneva Convention all at once. I should be proud of that. And I don't like that it hasn't tracked them all at once. As you can see in the balancing section, it does seem like I have committed several infractions all at the same time of the Geneva Convention, but barely any of them tracked, which was very, very frustrating. Not the end of the world, it's not, but a minor inconvenience that I'm not too impressed with. And then how does this mod fit in with your playthroughs? This mod will fit in with literally any playthrough. The Geneva Conventions are actually quite universal in terms of the tech appliances. We could use this in the tribal era, we can use this in the medieval era, we can use this in the space era, and it just works regardless of your playthrough. Whilst there are issues with the tracking and there are issues with certain things not working at certain times, it's still a mod that you can literally just chuck it in, and it's really interesting and really fun to see when you've broken a Geneva Convention, which I still can't get over the fact that I'm saying that. So for compatibility, this mod works in any playthrough. Just chuck it in, have a good time, look at it, enjoy it. You can reference back to the Geneva Conventions, which is really cool. But the tracking of things and the things not updating properly in the War Crimes tab, it's very frustrating to experience. Once you know how to fix it, it's fine, but you have to know that in the first place. So some clarity on the Steam Workshop page could go a long way. So for compatibility, I'm unfortunately going to be giving it a 4 out of 10 here. So next, my mod recommendations. Now, whilst I have said this mod will fit in with literally anything, there are certain playstyles I would potentially not recommend this mod with. If you're planning on growing a nice pretty farm and raising rabbits, I don't recommend having a mod that tracks the amount of Geneva Conventions you breach. If you're planning a playthrough where you cut up bodies, eat them, and you have a sanguiphage that drinks people's blood and there's slaves everywhere, then maybe you might want to consider this mod for the bans. So starting with my mod recommendations, we have Biological Warfare by Blue Eagle. This is an amazing mod, a mod I have previously reviewed and recommend heavily, so in depth, and obviously, I mean, Biological Warfare is kind of immediately breaching the Geneva Conventions. Next, we have War Crimes Expanded 2 Core. Whilst I'm not sure if it's actually tracked to whether or not cutting off people's limbs and things is part of the Geneva Conventions, this is definitely one you want to be playing with. Next, we have Prisoners with Jobs, definitely not slaves. Just because I feel like if you are having a lot of slaves and you're having a lot of prisoners to potentially do morbid tests on, you may as well make them do some work at the same time. And lastly, we have Prisoners Should Fear Turrets, because I mean, it makes sense, they probably should. So as you can tell, my mod recommendations here are generally focused around mistreating prisoners and doing things that you shouldn't do. All about breaching the Geneva Conventions, basically. It almost feels like there isn't any point using this mod unless you are going to be breaching Geneva Conventions and you can track things and you can have a good time with that. Like, it could be funny to play this with a playthrough that is all about looking after bunny rabbits and trading and things like that, and then you accidentally breach a Geneva Convention because of something you hadn't even realized you were doing. Like, you could use it with pretty much any playthrough. Should you? I don't know necessarily. So for mod recommendations here, yes, it does fit in with every playthrough, right? It's Rimworld, it does fit in. But should you use it in certain playthroughs? Is it kind of a waste of time? It's up to personal opinion. I'm going to be giving it an 8 out of 10 though. So for my conclusion, I want to state something that's very obvious. This is the most Rimworld mod that I have ever played. Yes, we have mods that I say are the best. We have mods that I say are the most intuitive. Mods that I say that have the best perspective for a great future. This mod defines the Rimworld community as a whole and is the most Rimworld experience that we can get out of mods. The fact that this hadn't been done before and this is a unique mod is amazing. The depth that it actually uses Geneva Convention's rules and everything is amazing. Whilst I get that's a given, it's nice to see that, and I've proved the direct quotes from the Geneva Conventions. But there are issues. The main issue is the tracking of the Geneva Convention infractions, and it's the actual updating of the war crimes page so we can actually see what we're actually doing in real time without having to reload the game constantly. Those couple of bugs that are really annoying have really let this mod down for me. It's not a reason for me to not use this mod in the future, but it makes me not as appreciative of this mod, that's for sure. Yes, it's not that big of a deal to not have all of your war crime infractions tracked, and I get it's not that big of a deal to reload the game occasionally so we can see all of our war crimes at certain points, but it's annoying and it's not something I appreciate. But for content, I gave it 9 out of 10, quality 10 out of 10, balancing 7 out of 10, compatibility 4 out of 10, my mod recommendation score is 8 out of 10, giving it the grand total score of 30 out of 50, which is a very high B rated mod. Do I recommend this mod? 110%. If you haven't already installed this mod to be playing it with just any old playthrough, you're missing out on a good time and finding out that you've actually committed some awful atrocities that wouldn't be allowed in real life. So despite the issues I have experienced and despite the things I think need to be improved on, this is still an amazing mod, and I don't see how this mod has not been done before. Like, full credits for the mod creator for finding the niche and absolutely doing an amazing job with that. But don't necessarily listen to my opinions. Please check out this mod for yourself and formulate your own opinions. So if you have enjoyed today's video, consider liking, subscribing, make sure you tell your mum about me. See you next time. Thank you.